That is the question whispered across the void, spoken in the dying breaths of 1,000 forgotten worlds, muttered in the nightmares of soldiers who survived battles they were never meant to see. And it is the question that haunts the souls, if they can even be called souls, of the warriors once known as the 12 Legion Astartes. Before they became monsters, before they became murderers shaped by the Emperor's hand and twisted by a god's laughter. Before the nails, before the infinite red haze, long before the galaxy knew them as world eaters, they were simply men bred for war. Warriors engineered not only to conquer but to endure the unbearable weight of constant violence. Yet even they could not imagine what they would become. No one could, for at the heart of their transformation lies something few dare to speak of, a truth so agonizing, so mutilating to the spirit, that even the boldest historians of the Imperium write about it as though carving their testimonies into their own flesh. Every story of the World Eaters begins the same way, with a slow, suffocating descent into madness. But the origins of that madness are not found on a battlefield, nor in the screams of their dying enemies. It begins inside their own skulls, in the pulsing, burning agony of the butcher's nails, the infernal implants that have become both their curse and their heartbeat. And understanding their horror requires understanding what it means to live with such torment. To wake up each day with pain gnawing at your mind like a chain blade. To feel your own thoughts torn apart, shredded until only one emotion remains, the desire to kill. For the World Eater, consciousness is suffering. Existence is a prison of fire. And rage, pure, unfiltered, savage rage, is the only relief. Imagine it for a moment. Imagine the sound of metal chewing through your thoughts every second you remain still. Imagine the way your memories are drowned beneath a sea of red static. Imagine losing the ability to hold on to anything gentle, hopeful, or human, because the nails punish such feelings with blinding agony. Peace hurts. Calm hurts. Reflection hurts. Only violence silences the screaming machine buried in your skull. Only blood quiets the storm. This is not a life. It is a sentence. And yet, before their fall into madness, before they became the blood-soaked legion feared across galaxies, the 12 Legion was known for something else, cold discipline. They were warriors of precision, not berserkers. They were strategists of relentless efficiency. Their brutality was calculated, not chaotic. They were feared, but not yet monstrous. Everything changed the day their Primarch, Angron, was found. He was a creature forged in torment, scarred by a lifetime of enslavement and battlefield slaughter, his brain pierced and mutilated by crude cybernetic agony machines, the first butcher's nails. When the Emperor came to retrieve him, he found not a noble son waiting to embrace his destiny but a beast shackled by torment. And in an act that would echo through millennia, the Emperor tore Angron away from the only family he had ever known, his fellow slaves, leaving them to die alone. That betrayal marked the beginning of everything that would come. For Angron would carry that wound forever, and he would carve it into the hearts of his legion. When Angron was forced to become the XII's master, he did not teach them honor. He did not teach them strategy. He taught them survival through pain. He forced them to share in his torment, ordering the implantation of the butcher's nails into their skulls. Some resisted, some begged, some died before the surgery was complete, but those who lived became something new. Something less than human, and yet more terrifying than any human could ever be. From that moment on, the World Eaters were no longer a legion. They were a storm. Their minds were torn apart and reassembled into engines of wrath. Their loyalty fractured and reformed into something harsher, colder, soaked in desperation and torment. Every waking moment was agony, every heartbeat a countdown to the next kill. For only killing brought silence. Only slaughter brought peace. Only rivers of blood washed away the gnawing pain long enough for them to feel a moment of clarity. And yet that clarity never lasted. It never could. Because the butcher's nails do not rest. They demand. They hunger. They whisper in pulses of agony that grow louder and louder until thought collapses beneath the crushing weight of animal fury. This is the horrifying truth of the World Eater's existence. They do not seek violence out of choice. They seek it because the alternative is unendurable. They are prisoners in their own minds, shackled by a torture device that punishes restraint and rewards only the most savage excess. They are soldiers who can no longer sleep without hearing the nails chewing at their sanity. Warriors who cannot remember the sound of silence. Brothers who cannot mourn, cannot love, cannot reflect, because every emotion that is not rage is a fresh wound carved open by their cerebral torment. Their life is not a tale of glory. It is a tragedy written in blood. And the galaxy fears them not because they enjoy killing, but because killing is the only thing that stops them from screaming. For a world eater, war is not a battlefield. War is a mercy. And so, as the galaxy spirals into the long night of the Horus heresy, and as Angron leads his legion down a path drenched in madness and betrayal, one truth becomes clear. There is nothing more terrifying than a warrior who must kill, simply to feel normal. For the World Eaters, that question was no longer hypothetical. It became their reality the moment Angron took command of the XII Legion. Unlike any leader they had ever known, Angron did not offer strategy or honor. He offered survival through pain and mastery over rage. The moment his Primarch spoke, every warrior felt the subtle shift in their very being, a recognition that their lives would no longer belong to them. They had become extensions of Angron's torment, conduits for a fury that knew no limit. The butcher's nails embedded deep in their skulls were no longer just instruments of agony, they were amplifiers of anger, turning each warrior into a living weapon of destruction. Small irritations became intolerable, whispers of restraint became unbearable, and the very act of thinking without violence became torture. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into endless campaigns of bloodshed, the World Eaters began to forget what it meant to be human. Their memories of friendship, of loyalty beyond killing, slowly corroded under the constant pressure of psychic pain. What remained was only the need to lash out, to spill blood, to feel the brief silence that came after another life ended. Yet, the Legion's transformation was not instant. Some resisted, holding on to fragments of their past selves, clinging to discipline or fleeting thoughts of honor. But resistance was fleeting. Angron's presence was a living storm, his fury contagious, his example inescapable. To witness him in battle was to feel the universe itself trembling with wrath. Those who faltered under the nail's influence were quickly left behind or destroyed, leaving only those capable of embracing the torment and wielding it as a weapon. As the World Eaters marched from world to world, their reputation spread like wildfire. Civilizations that once thought themselves untouchable crumbled under the weight of a legion that no longer recognized mercy. And yet, even as their enemies fell, the warriors themselves suffered silently. Each kill offered only momentary respite, a brief window of quiet inside the storm of agony raging in their minds. There was no glory here, no honor, only the unending demand of pain that could be quenched by nothing but more destruction. In the early campaigns under Angron, the line between soldier and monster blurred. When the Legion first engaged in full-scale combat against other Space Marine chapters, the horror became clear. These were not warriors fighting for victory, they were weapons of raw fury, unpredictable and uncontrollable. Even allies feared them, not because they lacked loyalty, but because their loyalty was submerged beneath an ocean of rage that could erupt without warning. And yet, paradoxically, it was that very rage that made them terrifyingly effective. Enemies fell before they even realized what had struck, and even the Imperium's most disciplined forces began to whisper legends of a legion that could not be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, cannot be stopped. This is the paradox of the World Eaters. They were both unstoppable and uncontainable, yet endlessly tormented. For every victory on the battlefield, every city razed, every enemy slain, the nails bit deeper, and the echoes of each death haunted the warriors' minds. In their dreams, if sleep could still be called that, they relived the screams of those they killed, the agony of failure, and the impossible task of silencing the storm within. And the more they tried to resist, the more the butcher's nails punished them. The descent into blood and madness was complete. By the time the Horus heresy erupted across the galaxy, the World Eaters were no longer the disciplined 12 Legion the Emperor had once admired. They were instruments of pure rage, a force of chaos incarnate, bound together not by camaraderie or honor, but by a shared suffering and an unquenchable thirst for violence. And yet, beneath the fury, a flicker of their humanity remained, a memory of what they were, a shadow of what they had lost, and a whisper of the question that would haunt them forever. Is survival worth this cost? For the World Eaters, that path began the moment the galaxy fractured under the weight of the Horus heresy. They were no longer soldiers bound to the Imperium's ideals, they were predators, instruments of war whose fury had long since outgrown the constraints of honor. Under Angron's command, the Legion embraced their true nature, chaos, carnage, and the worship of the Red God, Khorne. The battlefield became their sanctuary, the screams of the dying their hymn, and the rivers of blood that followed their march a testament to the horrifying transformation that had been set in motion decades earlier. The Horus heresy was not simply a war, it was the World Eaters' proving ground. And prove themselves they did, again and again, with a ferocity that left even the most hardened traitor legions trembling. Their assaults were swift, brutal, and indiscriminate. No plan, no defense, and no mercy could withstand the onslaught of warriors whose minds had been shattered and reforged into weapons of unfiltered rage. Angron led from the front, a whirlwind of claws, axes, and fury, each swing reinforcing the lesson that restraint was weakness and blood was the only relief. But it was not only the enemies of the Imperium who suffered, the World Eaters themselves were consumed by their own violence. Every engagement, every massacre, drove them further into madness. The butcher's nails screamed louder with each life taken, and the warriors felt themselves slipping ever deeper into something that could no longer be called human. They were killing machines, yes, but machines with the consciousness of tortured men, forever. Haunted by flashes of memory they could no longer reconcile with their monstrous present. Every drop of blood spilled offered a momentary silence, a fleeting calm before the next wave of pain. As the Legion's reputation grew, whispers of their deeds reached far and wide. Entire worlds fell under their siege, not because of strategy or siege engines, but because the mere presence of the World Eaters was enough to break the spirit of any defenders. Even the most seasoned planetary governors cowered, knowing that facing them meant more than death. It meant being ground into the endless cycle of rage that had become the World Eater's essence. And yet, the warriors themselves were prisoners in their own madness. They did not revel in their conquests because of pride or victory, they reveled because it allowed them to silence the unbearable storm raging in their minds, if only for a few precious moments. Within the Legion, the bonds of brotherhood were distorted into something darker. Loyalty existed, but it was defined by survival and shared suffering, not compassion or trust. Any hesitation or weakness was met with swift retribution, either from Angron himself or from the unrelenting fury of the brothers surrounding them. They became a legion without patience, without restraint, without morality, bound together only by the shared agony of the nails and the instinctive, unyielding drive to kill. The heresy revealed the full horror of what the World Eaters had become. No longer were they merely soldiers or warriors, they were avatars of rage, the living embodiment of the Red God's essence. And yet, even as they destroyed, there were moments of terrifying clarity. Flashes of memory from a past they could barely recall surfaced unexpectedly. The laughter of brothers, the camaraderie of campaigns before the nails, the faces of worlds they once swore to protect. Each memory was a knife in their minds, a reminder of the humanity they had lost, and a torment that the butcher's nails ensured would never fade. By the end of their early campaigns in the heresy, one fact became undeniable: the World Eaters had transcended the line between man and monster. They were unstoppable, uncontainable, and utterly horrifying. Yet, for all their might, for all the galaxies they had scarred with their rage, a single question lingered behind their screams and their blood-soaked victories. Is there any escape from the fury that defines you? The answer, as history, and horror, would show, was something no World Eater would ever truly know. For the World Eaters, that question became the axis of their existence. As the Horus heresy spread, their campaigns grew ever more ruthless, and their fury knew no bounds. Entire planetary systems were reduced to ash and bone under the relentless tide of their assault. Cities that once thrived now echoed only with screams, the ground slick with rivers of blood, and the air thick with the metallic stench of death. Yet, for all the devastation, the warriors themselves were not free. They were prisoners of the very violence they wrought, each kill a temporary bomb against the storm raging in their minds. Angron's influence was absolute. The Primarch himself was a living embodiment of wrath, a creature so consumed by his own pain that he could only find solace in war. His example shaped the Legion entirely, forcing each warrior to confront the reality of their own torment and embrace it fully. Restraint became a foreign concept, mercy was impossible. Even those who longed for their lost humanity found it impossible to resist the chorus of screaming nails that demanded action, demanded blood, demanded annihilation. The line between duty and rage had vanished entirely. And yet, beneath the layers of fury and blood, fragments of their former selves lingered like ghosts. Memories of brotherhood, of honor, of what it meant to protect rather than destroy, haunted the warriors in brief, shattering moments of lucidity. These fragments were dangerous. They created friction, moments of hesitation that could be fatal in the heat of battle. Angron recognized this instinctively, driving his legion to embrace total fury, punishing any sign of weakness or nostalgia with relentless ferocity. There could be no compromise, there could be no humanity. Only rage, and the cruel, ever-present pain of the butcher's nails to enforce it. The campaigns of this period are among the most horrifying in galactic history. The World Eaters became a blur of axes and chainswords, a storm that no civilization could withstand. And yet, the true terror was not their skill in combat, it was their unpredictability, the way the nails twisted every thought into violence, turning even minor skirmishes into unthinkable massacres. Allies feared them as much as enemies did, for no one could anticipate when the next eruption of rage would consume them entirely. They were weapons that could not be controlled, and even the most disciplined commanders of the traitor legions had to account for the possibility that the World Eaters would turn on them if provoked, or if the nails demanded it. The psychological torment within the legion escalated alongside the violence. Sleep became impossible. Dreams were haunted by the screams of past victims, and the line between reality and hallucination blurred. Every victory brought a fleeting sense of relief, only for the nails to resume their torment, reminding the warriors that no conquest could ever bring peace. The Red God's influence seeped into their very essence, turning rage into devotion and devotion into instinctive carnage. Killing became ritual, slaughter became prayer, and the warriors themselves became extensions of an unending cycle of fury. Yet in this abyss of violence and despair, the World Eaters retained one defining feature: endurance. They could survive anything the galaxy threw at them, not because of resilience, but because their very torment forced them to exist in a state beyond fear, beyond pain, beyond reason. Theirs was a life stripped of hope, stripped of joy, stripped of anything but the endless, necessary act of violence. And as the heresy spread and the legions clashed across the stars, the World Eaters were not merely participants, they were a living embodiment of war's darkest truth, that survival can come at the cost of your very soul. Every campaign, every massacre, every drop of blood spilled was a reminder of what they had become. Not men, not soldiers, but monsters shaped by suffering, driven by rage, and tethered forever to the merciless beat of the butcher's nails. Their path was blood-soaked, endless, and unescapable. And for those who would study them, one fact remained undeniable. The World Eaters do not fight for glory. They fight because to stop would be to surrender to a pain worse than death. For the World Eaters, that moment came when the fury that had been simmering for decades finally consumed every shred of their humanity. By this point in the Horus heresy, they were no longer soldiers who wielded axes, they were the axes themselves, instruments of chaos incarnate, and extensions of the Red God, Khorne. Every movement, every strike, every breath was driven not by thought, but by the raw, unrelenting need to destroy. Their enemies did not die, they were obliterated, devoured by a tide of rage that seemed to have no end. Angron led the legion with the force of a storm, a living hurricane of fury and blood. His presence alone could incite slaughter, his wrath was contagious, a psychic contagion that amplified the violence of every warrior around him. Under his command, the World Eater's campaigns escalated to horrors beyond reckoning. Planets fell in hours that had taken years for others to conquer. Armies were annihilated before their own commanders could understand the threat. And yet, despite their overwhelming power, the warriors themselves were prisoners of a torment that allowed no rest. Every kill offered only a momentary pause in the screaming storm of the butcher's nails. The battles were as much internal as they were external. In the minds of the World Eaters, there was no peace, only the constant gnawing of pain and the compulsion to act, to strike, to spill blood. They were haunted by fleeting memories of their former selves, faces of brothers and friends who had perished, and the distant echo of honor and discipline that had once defined them. These fragments of humanity became fuel for rage rather than solace. Every recollection of a time before the nail's torment intensified their bloodlust, turning sorrow into slaughter, grief into frenzy. In this period, the World Eaters became not just soldiers of war, but avatars of Khorne's will, living embodiments of his creed, blood for the blood god, skulls for the throne. Every world they conquered, every enemy they slaughtered, added to a legend that would haunt the galaxy for millennia. Civilizations whispered of the Crimson Tide, the unstoppable force that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or contained. And yet, even as they terrorized entire systems, the warriors themselves did not revel in conquest. Their fury was instinctive, automatic, born of pain that demanded release. Killing was not a choice, it was salvation. The transformation was complete. Where once they had been disciplined soldiers, they were now berserkers in the truest sense, no longer capable of reflection, restraint, or hesitation. Rage was no longer a weapon, it was their lifeblood. The butcher's nails dictated thought, action, and perception, turning every moment into a cycle of agony and violence. Each kill, each act of slaughter, brought fleeting relief, but the storm never ceased. Even the Red God himself seemed to smile upon their devotion, shaping them into perfect instruments of death and fury. And yet, even at the height of their monstrosity, one question remained, whispered in the void of their minds. What is left of the man beneath the rage? For the World Eaters, there was no answer, only the endless tide of battle, the unquenchable thirst for blood, and the terrifying, eternal truth: they were no longer men. They were rage made flesh, horror made real, and a warning to all who would underestimate the cost of unchecked fury. For the World Eaters, that was no longer a metaphor. It was their reality. By this stage of the Horus heresy, the relentless campaigns and the unending fury of the butcher's nails had taken their toll, not only on the galaxy, but on the warriors themselves. Though outwardly unstoppable, the Legion's inner world was fractured, a battlefield as chaotic and blood-soaked as the planets they had left in ruin. Rage had become both shield and prison, and every act of violence, no matter how satisfying, merely fed the gnawing torment inside their minds. The butcher's nails did more than amplify aggression, they tore at cognition itself. Thoughts became jagged, memories splintered, and moments of clarity were fleeting and dangerous. A warrior could remember his family, his childhood, his sense of honor, and the nails would punish him for it with unbearable agony. Every recollection of peace became a knife twisting deeper into the mind. The more a warrior fought to retain a shred of humanity, the more the nails demanded release through slaughter. And so, each act of violence became both necessity and curse, a fleeting silence in a mind that would never rest. Fractures within the Legion began to appear. Some warriors, unable to cope with the relentless torment, became unpredictable even to their brothers. Mutinies and internal conflicts arose, not out of disloyalty, but because the nails turned hesitation and doubt into rage that could not be contained. Even the presence of Angron could not fully control these eruptions, the very weapons of their torment. Now threatened to destroy the unity of the Legion. And yet, paradoxically, it was this shared suffering that kept them together, a grim cohesion built on pain, fury, and the unspoken understanding that only by killing could they endure. The psychological torment extended beyond mere internal conflict. The World Eaters' perception of the galaxy was twisted and distorted. They could no longer differentiate between friend and foe in the chaos of battle, nor could they distinguish between mercy and weakness. Every face became a potential target, every sound a provocation, every shadow a threat. The Nails amplified instincts to survive by killing, transforming the Legion into a living maelstrom of paranoia and slaughter. To live was to fight. To fight was to survive. To survive was to kill. There was no escape. And yet, amid this unending cycle, rare flickers of awareness emerged, moments when the warriors glimpsed what they had become. In the aftermath of a massacre, when the bodies cooled and the screams faded, some warriors would briefly remember their own faces beneath the blood, the men they once were before the Nails, before Angron, before the heresy. But such moments were dangerous. They brought guilt, despair, and a terrifying clarity of loss. The Nails punished them for such thoughts, and those who lingered too long in self-awareness were driven to violence against everything in reach, including their own brothers. This was the cruelest part of their existence, the knowledge that their suffering was both eternal and inescapable. Every kill, every world destroyed, every scream silenced, was only temporary relief. The storm within would return, stronger, louder, hungrier. And still, the World Eaters endured. They endured because they had no other choice, because stopping meant succumbing to unbearable torment, and because the fury that had destroyed their souls was the very thing keeping them alive. By now, the legend of the World Eaters had become more than tales of slaughter. It was a warning to the galaxy, a chilling example of what happens when rage is perfected, weaponized, and amplified beyond humanity. They were unstoppable, uncontainable, and utterly terrifying, but behind every killing blow in every fallen world, the true horror remained hidden. The warriors themselves were prisoners, shackled to a lifetime of agony and compelled to spill blood simply to survive. And as their campaigns continued, one grim truth emerged. Even the strongest warriors can be broken, and some, once broken, may never be whole again. By the time the Horus heresy reached its most brutal stages, the World Eaters had transcended the very idea of soldiers. They were no longer men, they were fury made flesh, a storm of muscle, metal, and bloodlust. Entire planets had been scorched under their assault, their conquests leaving nothing but ash and bone. Yet, paradoxically, the warriors themselves were not free. The Butcher's nails had fused with their minds so completely that rage was no longer a weapon. It was their lifeblood, their pulse, the only thing keeping their broken consciousness intact. To stop fighting would be to die in agony. To rest would be torture. To hesitate would invite madness. Angron was the epicenter of this storm. Wherever he stepped, violence followed like a shadow. His rage was infectious, a psychic contagion that amplified the fury of every warrior in his legion. Under his command, the World Eaters performed feats of destruction no other force could match. Entire defensive fleets were annihilated before they could even mount a proper assault. Cities fell in hours that had once taken entire planetary armies months to conquer. And yet, despite this unstoppable force, the warriors themselves were tormented internally. Each kill provided only fleeting silence, each victory a temporary reprieve from the unending gnaw of the nails. The battlefield became an extension of their minds, chaotic, relentless, and terrifying. Allies learned quickly to fear them as much as enemies, for the line between friend and foe blurred under the constant influence of the nails. Even the most disciplined members of the traitor legions struggled to predict their actions. Rage dictated every movement, every thought, every decision. There was no plan, no hesitation, no morality. There was only fury, and the need to unleash it in the most violent way possible. Yet within this apocalypse of blood and fire, glimpses of horror persisted. Some warriors occasionally glimpsed the faces of those they had once been, the disciplined soldiers, the brothers in arms who had fought for honor rather than chaos. These brief sparks of awareness were dangerous, often driving a warrior into uncontrollable fury or despair. The nails punished any attempt at reflection, twisting sorrow and regret into an even more violent obsession. Every hesitation, every flicker of humanity, only fueled the storm of rage. The campaigns at this stage became almost mythical in their savagery. Worlds were turned into wastelands, populations eradicated, and enemies obliterated before they could resist. Yet, the horror of the World Eaters was not in their efficiency, it was in the relentlessness, the unpredictability, the absolute certainty that when they arrived, death and suffering would follow. Even the galaxy's most seasoned historians and commanders could not comprehend the combination of unstoppable violence and unending mental torment that defined the Legion. And as the heresy reached its zenith, the World Eaters became living avatars of Khorne, the Red God. Rage was no longer merely a weapon, it was their existence. Every swing of an axe, every roar, every drop of blood spilled was a hymn to their god, a desperate act of survival against the storm inside their own skulls. In their eyes, there was no fear, no hesitation, no hope, only fury, and the endless need to kill. At the height of their power and madness, one truth became undeniable. The World Eaters no longer fought for honor, loyalty, or victory, they fought because without slaughter, they would be consumed by the agony within. The galaxy would remember them not as men, not as soldiers, but as living nightmares, unstoppable engines of destruction, and the most horrifying consequence of unbridled rage. By this point, the World Eaters were beyond redemption. The Horus heresy had stripped away everything that had once defined them as soldiers, leaving only fury and pain. The Butcher's nails had fused with every thought, every instinct, every heartbeat. Angron's presence amplified this torment, ensuring that the Legion's rage was absolute, uncontested, and eternal. They no longer remembered discipline, strategy, or mercy. All they remembered was the hunger for blood, the need to kill, and the unbearable relief it brought. Every battle, every massacre, every scream was a brief pause from the agony inside, a temporary quiet in a storm that would never end. As their campaigns reached their most devastating stages, the World Eaters became indistinguishable from the living embodiment of Khorne's wrath. Entire worlds were eradicated, not merely conquered. Populations were obliterated, cities reduced to ash. Every act of destruction fed both their god and the nails that ruled their minds. And yet, even in this apex of fury, the warriors themselves were haunted by flickers of memory, shards of the men they once were, reminders of honor, camaraderie, and the humanity that had been ripped from them. Those moments were fleeting and dangerous, often sparking violence even more. Frenzied than before, as the nails punished any reflection with unbearable pain. The internal unraveling of the Legion became as terrifying as their outward destruction. The longer they fought, the more their minds fractured. Brothers turned against brothers not out of malice but instinctive compulsion driven by the nails. The line between ally and enemy, friend and foe, blurred entirely. Rage became both the weapon and the cage, and survival depended entirely on embracing the fury that had once been a curse. Angron himself could barely contain the maelstrom, leading his warriors into carnage that seemed unstoppable not just because of skill or strategy, but because fury had replaced thought entirely. And then, at the peak of their terror, the true cost of their existence became undeniable. They were no longer men. They were instruments of chaos, avatars of rage, and slaves to the unending storm inside their own minds. Every victory brought no joy, no pride, only the fleeting respite of silence before the nails demanded more. Every enemy slain was only a temporary distraction from the relentless torment gnawing at their consciousness. And yet, for all their power, all their destruction, the World Eaters endured because they had no other choice. To stop was to surrender to unimaginable pain, to hesitate was to be devoured by their own minds. In these final moments, as the galaxy reeled under the weight of their fury, one horrifying truth crystallized: the World Eaters would never know peace. Their rage was eternal, their torment unending, and their path irrevocable. They had become living warnings, a testament to the price of uncontrolled fury, the cost of torment unrelieved, and the terrifying potential of warriors who exist only to kill in order to survive. The galaxy would remember them as monsters. But in truth, the real horror lay within, the men who had become monsters, trapped forever in the storm of their own rage. Some wounds are not meant to heal, and some warriors are not meant to live in peace. The World Eaters are proof of both. The campaigns were over, but the storm inside the World Eaters never ceased. The galaxy lay scarred, countless worlds erased, and trillions of lives extinguished, yet the warriors themselves remained imprisoned by the unending rage that had defined them for decades. The butcher's nails still screamed, reminding them that every moment of calm was temporary, every heartbeat a countdown to the next eruption of violence. Survival had never been free, it had come at the cost of their humanity, their souls, and their very identities. The aftermath of their blood-soaked path was as horrifying as the battles themselves. Even as the heresy waned and the traitor legions scattered, the World Eaters remained a force of uncontrollable destruction. They were no longer just a legion, they were a warning written in crimson across the stars. Stories of their massacres became legend, whispered in fear by those who survived, immortalized in the nightmares of the galaxy. And yet, for the warriors themselves, these stories mattered little. Each survivor was a mind shattered by fury, a body conditioned only to endure and destroy, trapped in a cycle that would never end. Angron remained their central figure, a living hurricane of wrath whose presence ensured the cycle persisted. He was not a commander in the traditional sense, he was the heartbeat of the storm, the embodiment of rage itself. Under him, the World Eaters' identity as men had long since vanished, replaced by something darker, something primal, something terrifying. And even as the galaxy turned away from the horrors they had wrought, the Legion's internal torment continued. Every thought, every fleeting memory of humanity, every question of morality was immediately punished by the nails, driving them further into the abyss. The final realization for any who would study them was stark: the World Eaters are not merely monsters because of the blood they spill. They are monsters because their very existence is a testament to the fragility of the mind, the destructive potential of unrelieved rage, and the horrifying consequence of turning warriors into weapons without mercy. Their story is a warning that even the strongest, bravest, or most disciplined can be undone, reshaped into something unrecognizable, something unstoppable, something horrifying. And yet, paradoxically, there is a grim endurance to their existence. Though stripped of identity, morality, and peace, the World Eaters continue to fight, survive, and rage, not for glory, not for honor, not even for their God, but because the alternative is unbearable. Every battle is both punishment and relief, every kill both torment and necessity. Theirs is a life without end, a story without closure, a horror without redemption. In the end, the galaxy may remember the World Eaters as monsters, as the scourge of countless worlds, as avatars of rage incarnate. But the truth, hidden beneath the blood and fury, is far darker. The real horror of the World Eaters lies not in what they do, but in what they are forced to endure, the unending, inescapable torment of a mind shackled by rage, a body driven only to kill, and a soul lost to eternity. For the World Eaters, the answer is simple, terrifying, and eternal: rage. Centuries of war, torment, and unending violence have stripped them of humanity, leaving nothing behind but fury incarnate. Even as the galaxy rebuilt itself from the ashes of their massacres, the warriors remained, unbroken, unrelenting, uncontainable. They are not remembered for honor, strategy, or loyalty. They are remembered for the storm they embody, a living testament to the horror of rage unbound and suffering perfected. The butcher's nails continue to claw at their minds, whispering, demanding, punishing any flicker of hesitation, empathy, or memory of a life long lost. Each warrior is trapped in a cycle that has no end. Kill, endure pain, feed the storm, repeat. And in this endless cycle, there is no victory, no redemption, no peace. The only truth is survival through slaughter, and the only escape is the fleeting silence of another life ended. They are eternal prisoners of their own fury, living nightmares in both body and mind. Even Angron, their primarch, is both master and fellow prisoner, bound to the same torment he unleashed upon his legion. The rage that defines him defines every warrior under his command. It is their identity, their curse, and their only constant. To witness a world eater is to see fury perfected, a being for whom violence is instinct, rage is sustenance, and existence itself is agony tempered only by more bloodshed. The galaxy may attempt to understand them, to fear them, or to destroy them, but the truth is inescapable. The world eaters cannot be stopped. They are beyond man, beyond soldier, beyond morality. They exist only as engines of fury, echoes of a terror that began with the implantation of the butcher's nails, escalated through betrayal and war, and solidified under the unyielding hand of Angron. They are immortals of wrath, eternal in their torment, and eternal in the havoc they leave behind. And so, the final lesson remains. Some warriors are not meant to be heroes, some legions are not meant to be tamed, and some storms are not meant to end. The world eaters are proof of this truth, living monuments to the ultimate cost of rage unbound, a warning written across the stars in blood and bone. They are rage made flesh. They are horror made real. They are eternal.